Hey, what's going on everybody? It's me back again for another video, and today I'm going to be talking about another one of my experiences in college. This one is a little bit different from the ones I've been doing in the past. I started writing it as more of kind of a story time type deal with maybe a little bit of a more PG-13 kind of element, but as I was writing, I thought there was some interesting things I wanted to bring up. I didn't so much want to have to focus on harking on the specific points that made this a little more like risky, which I understand is kind of the tone of some of my past videos, and it's a tone I want to continue with future videos forward. But as I was writing this specific story, like just going through the points and kind of recalling what happened, because this happened to me a couple years ago, and honestly just as I was writing it I realized that I had just like not forgotten, because clearly I could recall it, but I had just kind of not thought about a lot of these things in years, and what I originally thought would be more of kind of like a sexy story time honestly kind of morphed more into what's essentially some form of a class analysis, which I thought would be an interesting turn for the videos that I was taking, and also I just thought it was honestly something slightly more interesting to say. So with all that kind of pretext, I just want to thank you guys for watching another one of my videos. I really appreciate it. I've been enjoying filming these, and let's get into the story time. Okay, so first things first is that this is a story that happened to me my freshman year back in college. So it's been a little bit. Like I said, it took me some time to just kind of recall the finer points of this because I just hadn't thought of this in a while. But going back to my freshman year of college, my rooming situation was maybe one of the worst that I had ever seen with all of my friends and like all of my acquaintances. It was honestly just a nightmare, the fact that I made it through those first months of rooming there, which honestly, like, I did everything I could to change my room, but the fact that I made it through it was just kind of shocking to me. I can make a whole other story time about that, but essentially at my college, they had overbooked everything, so they had crammed a bunch of students into what they called triples, which is basically just a room designed for two people that they put a third person in to make it horrible. And aside from it already just being that cramped situation, for whatever reason in the building I was staying in, which was already kind of like the old crusty dorms, for whatever reason my room was one of the smaller rooms. Like, I had thought that's what everyone was doing, like what everybody had, but then as the year progressed and I had made some friends and spent some time in their rooms, I realized that a lot of the rooms in my own building were bigger than mine, and they weren't triples. So, alright, so we're back. Sorry, I got interrupted by like multiple phone calls and texts. Basically, after all that is said and done, just kind of setting up the experience of where I was, I had petitioned a couple times, sent some emails, filled out the forms, whatever, to get my room changed, because I just did not want to live with the people I was living with anymore. I did not want to be living in that situation. And they say there's like a specific form and like path you can go through to get that changed. With all that being said, the school was overcrowded, and the likelihood of me actually getting moved to a different room was pretty low, just because, I mean, they were already overcrowding all the rooms, so like they're not very likely to be shuffling people around if they don't have to. And if I'm being honest, I just don't know that they cared very much to. I think I had petitioned in maybe like October, November, did whatever, filled out the other forms, and I just never really heard back anything, so I just kind of thought like it's not going to happen. First semester is over, second semester rolls around, and I just kind of made peace with what was happening. And then I think it was the middle to end of March that I heard back, and they had finally had a room opening and given me an assignment, which is a little bit weird just because the semester was over at the end of May, so I think it was basically just like 5 or 6 weeks left in the semester, but I still hated where I was living, so I was like, honestly, even if you give me 3 days in a new place, I'll just move, because it's 3 days I can spend somewhere that's not here. They'd given me the date, and I think it was like a week or two out, and then that time passes, and I'm packing up all my stuff. I move into the new room, which was actually in the dorms that were much nicer. They were the new dorm buildings, so I was really happy about that. It was higher up, so you had a better view. It was actually a really beautiful view, and this was one of like the nicest dorms they had on campus for the freshmen. So I move in, and when I first move in, I walk into I call it an apartment. It was a dorm. It just felt more like an apartment. It felt more like an actual living space than the other one just felt like a closet. But this new one actually was just like a good sized dorm. There was only one other person in it, and when I got in there on my first day, they had given me the card key and whatever, and he wasn't there, but there was a bunch of stuff on the other side of the room, so I could tell which bed was his and which bed was supposed to be mine. And he wasn't there, which honestly I was kind of glad about, because I thought it would be kind of awkward of me just like coming in and like moving all of my stuff into what had been his room for the last 8 months. So I got that all taken care of. I did it over the process of maybe like 2 days. It wasn't that much, but it was enough stuff, like it was my entire life was in my first dorm. So then I was moving it into the new one, take a couple trips, get settled in. Over the course of the 2 days, I had not seen him. So it's just kind of like, I don't really know. Most of the people I knew were in their dorm rooms a lot of the time because, I mean, where else were you going to be? Yeah, people would go out, people would party. Sometimes they wouldn't come home that night. But for the most part, it's like, it had been a couple days and I hadn't seen him once. And then I moved in over the course of a weekend, and I think the next week started to go by, so maybe I moved in like a Friday, Saturday kind of thing. And then I think it was like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. At this point I was settling into the place, and I just still hadn't seen him once. And I wasn't there all the time. I had classes and other things to be doing, but it's like I slept there every night and he didn't come home once, which was kind of odd. And it was basically until, I think, Wednesday or Thursday. So it'd been like almost a full week of this guy not coming in. And I think maybe like after Tuesday I had come home and some of its stuff had been moved. So I knew he had been in there, and I knew he had seen that I had been in there, but we just kept missing each other, which was like kind of weird, because when you think about it, it's like, how do they expect you to just essentially live with strangers? And aside from my own thing of like having a roommate that I know has been in what is now my room and just like not gotten to meet him, but on top of that, can you imagine how weird it would be being in his situation where you've been living in the same space for months and then it's empty, and then suddenly there's just a random new person who shares this room with you that you just like haven't seen? Like, it's wild. But anyway, the days go by, we keep missing each other. He doesn't sleep there once, which is like just kind of wild to me. And finally, I think it was just an afternoon after class, and that was finally when the door opens and he comes in, and I was so glad that it was during that time period, because my biggest fear, and what happened to me a lot with my old roommates, was it would be like 1 or 2 in the morning and I'd be like getting ready for bed, and they would walk in with like a crowd of people as I'm like lying down to go to sleep, and I'm already like anxious enough. So the last thing I need is like, imagine you're lying in bed and literally just like a group of strangers walks into your bedroom. Like, that's essentially what this was. So I was so glad that he came into the room in the afternoon. I had already been up, so I was like put together. Everything was good. He was by himself. We got a chance to just kind of like hang out for a few minutes. I think he was just grabbing something and going. He was a nice guy, really tall, athletic, blonde hair. I think he was like 6'4". He was like really tall. And we got the chance to meet, hang out. He had told me that he was his friends had an apartment off campus that he was essentially living at, so that's kind of why he hadn't been there and why it had taken a while to meet. But he confirmed that he had been back a couple times to like grab some of his stuff, but we just hadn't met, which like, that's fine. But he seemed like a nice enough guy, and I was honestly glad that we got the chance to meet. Now we're going to kind of get into like the meat of this video, which was essentially that he was kind of the perfect example of like the California gay teen, like perfect, like he's what you would see in like a television show. And even just when I first walked into that room, it was so much different from the experience that I had had previously, because it was well furnished, it was tidy, it was decorated. It wasn't just kind of like what you would think of like the 18-year-old kid moves in and like his mattress is on the floor. Like, this was a very nice space. It had a coffee table set up, a couch, a TV. That's why I say it feels kind of more like an apartment than a dorm, because like my old dorm basically just had like the beds and two like crappy dorm desks, but this one was like well furnished. It was decorated. He walks in, he's looking very put together. He just kind of like glows of like health and like that vague sense of wellness. He's wearing these like nice clothes. They fit him really well. They seem like they're kind of well constructed. And even though I was like put together, it was fine. Like I look back at pictures and I think like, oh, it's not as big of a deal as I was making it out. Like I was making it out like these people were like gods, and it was just like something I had to try really hard for. Like if you look back at the pictures, you can't really tell the difference. But like for me, what it felt, I had never lived in an area that was essentially like, it was a rich kid area. And I don't think I really put that together at the time. I was thinking it was just kind of like culturally, like they're just used to dressing up and doing things nice and everything looks so nice for them and it just kind of like comes easy to them. Meanwhile, where I was coming from, I had always been more put together than maybe like a lot of people I had kind of, at least like at my high school, it was pretty hard to be like, it was pretty like easy to outdo the people you're around when they're like wearing full camouflage. Like if you just wear a button-up shirt one time, you're like leaps and bounds ahead. But these people had clothes that looked like they were just like tailored fit to them. They were new, they were fashionable. A lot of them came with like these brands. So it was definitely an interesting experience, and just kind of meeting this guy, because the people I had lived with before did not come from the area, so it was easier for me to relate to them. And while I did much prefer my new roommate to my old roommate, it was definitely kind of like an exemplification of the things I had already noticed just with the kids that I was around in the area. He was kind of this like perfectly put together person. And aside from the time that we had just met, I did start to see him a little more frequently. There were a few nights he stayed over. I think in the entire like 2 or 3 months that I was living there, he only stayed over maybe like 10 nights out of that time, out of like 50 maybe, which is, it's still kind of wild to me, but I guess he was just staying with his friends. But I just remember this feeling of just feeling kind of like inadequate around him. And eventually, a couple times, he brought some like friends over, and they were just kind of these stereotypical, like, it was basically this group of like gay teens, which honestly just put me to shame in every way. They were very open about it, so this isn't me just like speculating. Like we had had conversations about it, like we knew where each other stood. And like where I was coming from is just this like, it was just nothing comparable, because like fellow LGBT people in my area, like, yes, they were ahead of maybe like what you would expect from like straight presentation, but it wasn't near like, that's more equivocal to like the straight people out in the new area that I was, like out in California, as opposed to where like the gay kids out in California, like they were put together, like they were on it. And I just remember, I have this vivid memory of like it being a Saturday night, and I was sitting in my dorm room wearing kind of like gross old sweatpants and a hoodie that I had gotten from like not Old Navy, it was like a thrift store basically. And I just kind of like had come home from class, I was coming home, and I think I was watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and I just remember like sitting with like a tiny personal pizza that they sold on campus and like some chips, and just kind of like hanging out watching trash reality TV on my Saturday night alone in my dorm. And like they would come in basically looking like models. Like they were all very fit, they were very good looking, they were all like dressed up and going out, and they would talk about like going clubbing in West Hollywood. Like that's what they were doing. And I just remember feeling like kind of bad about myself, because aside from the fact that like I had a hard time making friends out there, I had a hard time like relating to the people I was around. Aside from the fact that they came from this area, so they had these kind of like social groups built in, and it was easy for them to like mold them and build off of them because they were already starting from something. They all just kind of had this shared expectation of the culture. And I had just kind of like internalized this at that age of saying it's something that I just cannot reach. It's something that's not going to come easy for me. I have to really try at this. Meanwhile, it just comes to them like it's just something in the water. They're the kind of people who go out to clubs and do all these really interesting things, and like the stories I heard from these kids were honestly just like wild. I can get into like stories of like the rich kids I heard at college, because honestly it's just like not relatable in any way, but just the fact like they were the kind of people who got dressed up and had a bunch of friends and went out clubbing, and I was the kind of person who like sat at home and watched reality TV. I think as we kind of get into the analysis of this video, and this is just kind of something I'd been picking up on more recently, The reason I say class analysis is because I think that's most of what this comes down to. You'll find an endless number of YouTube videos of people talking about like class analysis of the rich, but which I think it's interesting looking at people who are like the Real Housewives, who are just like these upper echelons of upper echelons. But to me, it wasn't something I had really experienced. I was at that time I was thinking of it more as a cultural thing, as more instead of a financial thing. But I look back and I remember little clues that had been dropped. Just kind of the stuff of like, first of all, living in this area, the person who I was living with now, his parents had come in and basically decorated the dorm room for him. And that entirely came down to money. Like they had the money to get him like these coffee tables, this nice couch for the dorm, like this whole area. They had like a whole like plan set up and decor. They had like the lights hanging around the room. So it was this whole thing. And he had also gone in talking about like, oh yeah, like his parents, basically like his parents buying clothes for him. The stores they had in the area were like just nice stores. Like we didn't even have the stores that they have out there around here, or if we did, they were like much closer to a city. So it's like nobody I went to high school, especially like the boys I was with, they couldn't tell you what Lululemon was. And like the difference between them and like the gay kids was like I could probably tell you what it was, but I didn't own anything. Meanwhile, like these kids' parents were exclusively shopping for them at these like more boutique type stores. So it makes sense that aside from just like whatever, they just looked better. They had clothes that fit them better. They were allowed to feel more confident based off of the clothes they put together. They had money for things. They'd get like $100 haircuts. They'd get their teeth whitened. They had like special skincare routines that they didn't even really think about. And I think that's kind of why it was so hard for me, because it seemed effortless to them, when in reality it's not effortless. It's just what you grow up to expect. And I think one of the biggest things I learned from college was just the ability to see the privilege of others and then also like turn that back in and see like how the situation you grew up impacted you, where it's like you notice the things that they have and you don't, but it also kind of like lets you turn it around and notice the things that you have that other people don't. Because I think given the area that I kind of grew up with, most of the kids I went to high school did not go to private universities. Like that's just not something that really happened. None of the friends that I have ended up studying abroad, and I had that opportunity. And all of this just kind of comes down to money. So it's like I look at the things that I had that they didn't, and it's like, oh, that's just like, it's a money thing. It's whose parents are able to help them out with these things. And then I look at it like I see the kids I went to school with, talk to them about like, it would be like winter breaks coming up, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm flying home for winter break for like a month. I'm like, I thought I was just like so special because it's like, oh, I'm on an airplane. Like, isn't that crazy? Isn't that rich? Meanwhile, these people would talk about like meeting their parents at the ski lodge in Switzerland over break, and like it just like knocked me down like 3 or 4 pegs, because that's what all these kids were doing. And I think it was just interesting because kind of where I grew up, you think of like queer people are kind of this pinnacle of like fashion and style and on trend and being worldly, which essentially it would be interesting to do like a deeper dive into like queer as being synonymous for upper class, because essentially all the things that you think about as queer people is the same kind of signifiers you would see as upper class, of being like put together, wearing nicer clothes, being really fit, having the time and money to go to a gym, eating healthy. It's just kind of like synonymous with that. In a lot of ways, at least. So I think, to me, having a roommate who was so similar to me, like in just sense of like identity and maybe education and interests, but then like he grew up and was able to like be on a surfing team, and like he grew up and like they were traveling, so he had all these interesting stories about the places they were going to. So while some of the other kids, I guess I just didn't feel it as harshly to them, because I just felt more different. But I think coming and then living with a guy who was just like, because I think even aside from like the wealth of just the average person who went to the school, I think he was operating above that, because it's like the dorm room he had was just objectively nicer than even a lot of the people in the building and I had previously. So even if they were coming from money, it wasn't really showing it. But then I like, it was basically like going from living in a closet to like a luxury apartment, like, and being kind of thrust into this, and then like seeing the people he was hanging around, and like what had been the culture of people who just like grew up in that area of California. So like I said, I had started this video kind of like wanting it to just be like a, oh, like, cool gay roommate puts me to shame, which, like, honestly he did. Like, that's just kind of what happened. He was better dressed than me, he had more interesting experiences than me, he grew up in this area of California, and I'm sure he still probably lives there and is, like, living his best life. Great for him. But it had also, I wanted to tie it into these thoughts I had been recently having just about the socioeconomic experiences of the people in the area versus me, and then how when I moved back home after college, being able to bring these experiences with me back to here and kind of analyzing my own life against the lives of the people there, and realizing more how I'm a product of my own environment, just kind of like how they were, and how that leads to different experiences and different tastes and things. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah, I guess I could get into, like, we definitely had some interesting experiences. I don't know that it's anything on par with, like, the stories I had about, like, being around frat brothers that kind of, like, they're not really spicy stories. Like, I could talk about maybe, like, some of the hints that I think he was dropping with me, that, like, maybe he wanted to do things with me, but, like, it never really went anywhere, and I'm not gonna just, like, fabricate a story for that purpose. And also, I just, like, I don't think that was the interesting thing to be talking about here. So, yeah, I guess that's the story. Comment what you think. I don't know how I feel about going forward with these kind of, like, more in-depth analysis, but I think the transparency will lead to a more interesting experience and maybe a more interesting audience engagement, just as people are going forward, and, like, if they want to comment on my videos, let me know about the thoughts you have. Like, let me know not just if you went to a college from, like, a different socioeconomic background from what you raised up in, but even just, like, experiences you had. Like, maybe you went to a community college in your area, but then you studied abroad for a semester, and how that semester was. I guess I could also go into the semester I studied abroad. I'll save that for a different video, because this is already over 20 minutes, and it takes my computer so long to upload these videos. I can't imagine how people who have, like, 3 hours of video are possibly, like, it would take them, like, days to upload their videos to YouTube. But yeah, let me know down in the comments if you have any similar experience. I remember it's those memes about, like, the foreign exchange students who were just, like, really wealthy and, like, walking around in their Gucci track suits. Those were rampant here. The amount of, like, kids I saw coming from, like, different countries who drove, like, Bentleys around the college campus, which is just wild to me, because, like, I talked to a few of them, and none of their family lived here. So, like, I'm kind of thinking, like, how are you, a 19 or 20-year-old, driving a Bentley around a college campus? Like, did you just buy that car for college? Did you have it shipped overseas? Like, Jesus. But I just thought that was kind of a fun and interesting topic, and something I had just been thinking about recently. And this is kind of a rambly video, but I think that's kind of fun. I like just talking to the camera, and if you like hearing my thoughts, then I'm glad you watched the video, because this is what I've been thinking about a lot recently. So thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to check me out on my other social media platforms. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Twitch, I do Reddit. If you know the kind of stuff I post over there, it's a little different from here. And if you're coming from over there to watch these videos, I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Maybe I'll do another vlog. I have a few of these other videos scripted. And yeah, we're just kind of hanging out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.